A lone piano, bathed in the soft glow of a single spotlight, sits at the center of an empty stage. It is a world unto itself, but it is not a silent world. The hands that find their way to its keys belong to a woman who has communed with its spirit for as long as she can remember. A woman who, from the very beginning, seemed to exist in a space between worlds, between the divine and the profane, between innocence and experience, between the oral and the visual. She is Tori Amos, and her story is not simply a biography. It is a confession, a revelation, a testament to the power of a voice that was once nearly silenced, a spirit that was almost broken. Born Myra Ellen Amos on August 22, 1963, in Newton, North Carolina, her life began under the watchful eye of a Methodist minister, her father, Edison Amos, and her mother, Mary Ellen. Her family moved to a suburb of Baltimore, Maryland, when she was 2, and it was there, in the quiet suburban landscape, that the first stirrings of her extraordinary talent began to emerge. Her father, a man of God, was also a man of music, and he recognized something special in his young daughter. She could play a tune on the piano by ear at age 2.5, a feat that seemed less like practice and more like an innate language. Her older brother Brian would later recall, "It was like she was born knowing how to play. The music was already inside her, just waiting to come out." By age 5, she was composing her own songs. The piano was not just an instrument. It was a confidant, a collaborator, a diary. It was the place where she could go to make sense of the world, a place her father called her escape hatch. This prodigious talent led her to the Peabody Institute of the Johns Hopkins University, one of the most prestigious conservatories in the world. At 5 years old, she was the youngest person ever admitted. But the rigid, classical world of Peabody was a stark contrast to the wild, free-flowing creativity that defined her. They wanted her to play the notes on the page. She wanted to play the notes in her soul. She resisted the strict discipline, the joyless repetition, and the expectation that she would become a flawless machine, a perfect reproduction of a dead composer's vision. She was a creator, not a copyist. The inevitable clash of wills came to a head when she was 11. She was asked to leave. It was a rejection that would haunt her, a wound that would take years to heal. The official reason was insubordination. But for Tori, it was a profound declaration that her unique voice, the very essence of her being, was not welcome in their hallowed halls. The years that followed were a whirlwind of self-discovery and rebellion. She was a teenager trying to find her place in a world that didn't seem to have one for her. While her peers were listening to pop radio, she was delving into the raw, emotional power of artists like Joni Mitchell and Kate Bush. She started playing gigs in piano bars in Washington, D.C. with her father, who, despite his pastoral duties, recognized the need to let her find her own path. She performed under her given name, Myra Ellen Amos, and the experience was a crucible. She was a young woman in a man's world, a world of smoke, alcohol, and cynical patrons. It was here she learned to command a room, to quiet the chaos with the sheer force of her talent. It was here she started to shed the skin of Myra Ellen and become Tori. In the early 1980s, Tori moved to Los Angeles, driven by the siren song of fame. She signed a record deal with Atlantic Records and, under the band name Why Can't Tori Red, released an album in 1988. It was a calculated attempt to fit into the big-haired, synthesizer-heavy world of 80s rock. The album was a commercial and critical failure. The experience was devastating. It was a betrayal of her truest self, a desperate attempt to be something she wasn't. Music critics savaged the record, and the public ignored it. It was like they were trying to put a square peg in a round hole, said a music executive who worked with her at the time. She was a songwriter, a poet, and they were trying to make her into a rock star. The failure was so profound that Atlantic Records was prepared to drop her. She had given them a piece of what they wanted, and they had rejected it. In that moment of utter professional collapse, something shifted. She decided to give them what she wanted. In 1991, Atlantic gave her one last chance. She returned with a collection of deeply personal, piano-driven songs. The album was called Little Earthquakes. It was raw, vulnerable, and unlike anything else on the airwaves. The songs were a window into her soul, her childhood, her religious upbringing, her sexuality. And in a moment of shocking, terrifying honesty, she sang about a brutal and violent experience in a song called Me and a Gun. It was a cappella song, sung without the safety net of instrumentation, a voice alone in the darkness. The song described a sexual assault she had endured years earlier. The courage it took to put that experience into a song and share it with the world was breathtaking. It wasn't a choice to write that song, she would later say. It was a necessity. It was the only way I could get it out. The song resonated with millions of listeners who had experienced similar traumas but had never heard them spoken of so plainly. It was a lifeline for so many, a beacon in the darkness. Little Earthquakes was a triumph of the human spirit. The album sold millions of copies, and Tori Amos, the girl who had been rejected by the classical world and failed by the rock world, was now a voice for a generation. Her public persona was as enigmatic and captivating as her music. She was a red-headed pixie, a woman who spoke in metaphors and riddles, and who sat at her piano as if it were an extension of her body. She was a feminist icon, a woman who had taken a profound trauma and turned it into art, a woman who had challenged the patriarchal structures of both the church and the music industry. Her relationships with men were often a source of fascination for the public. She was briefly engaged to producer and engineer Eric Ross, who worked on her early albums. The relationship was a creative and emotional anchor during her most formative years. But as her star rose, the pressures of fame began to take their toll. The intense, often codependent nature of their relationship couldn't withstand the seismic shifts happening in her life. Her work in the 1990s continued to push boundaries and explore the darker corners of the human psyche. Albums like Under the Pink, 1994, and Boys for Pele, 1996, solidified her status as a singular artist. The latter album in particular was a daring, often unsettling exploration of her relationship with her Christian upbringing and her complex feelings about gender and power. The album's cover featured her posing with a gun, a stark echo of the trauma she had sung about years before. The music was dense, challenging, and filled with the imagery of a Southern Gothic fever dream. It was a deliberate move away from the more radio-friendly sound of her first two albums, a defiant declaration that she would not be tamed. The album polarized critics, with some calling it a masterpiece and others calling it a self-indulgent mess. But for her fans, it was a testament to her uncompromising artistic vision. "She was so raw, so fearless on that record," said a longtime fan. "It felt like you were reading her most private thoughts." The relentless pressure of fame, the constant touring, and the emotional weight of her music began to manifest in her private life. She had always been a deeply introspective person, but the line between her public and private self began to blur. She was an artist who bled on the canvas, and the wounds never seemed to fully heal. Her personal life became a mirror of her artistic struggles. The end of her relationship with Eric Ross left a void, a feeling of being unmoored. The music had become her life, and her life had become her music. The boundaries were gone. She began a new relationship with her sound engineer, Mark Hawley. Their bond was born in the studio, a place where she felt most at home, most herself. They were married in 1998, and their union brought a new kind of stability to her life, a sense of grounding that she had desperately needed. But the marriage did not erase the inner turmoil. She had always been a deeply spiritual person, but her relationship with faith was a complicated one, filled with questions and anger. She had grown up in the church, but she had been hurt by it, rejected by it. Her music was an ongoing dialogue with God, a series of arguments, pleas, and demands. This spiritual struggle was a constant undercurrent in her work. The pressures of being a public figure who spoke so openly about her pain also took a toll. She was often seen as an otherworldly figure, a kind of musical oracle. But beneath the ethereal persona was a very real, very human woman who was struggling to navigate the complexities of life. She had also endured several miscarriages, a profound and private pain that she would later address in her music. The weight of these personal tragedies, combined with the professional demands, could have crushed a lesser artist. But Tori, ever the survivor, poured her pain into her work, transforming grief into something beautiful. The 2000s saw Tori enter a new phase of her life and career. She was a wife and a mother. Her daughter, Natasha, was born in 2000, and motherhood brought a new sense of purpose and a new kind of joy to her life. It also brought a new perspective to her music. She was no longer just the angry young woman at the piano. She was a woman who was looking at the world through the eyes of a child, a woman who was trying to build a safe and beautiful world for her daughter. The music became more varied, more expansive. Albums like Scarlet's Walk, 2002, and The Beekeeper, 2005, were ambitious, sprawling concept albums that explored the American landscape, both physical and emotional. She was an artist who refused to be confined to a single genre, a single sound, or a single persona. "She's always been a shapeshifter," said a music critic. "You think you have her figured out, and then she goes and does something completely different." Her later career was defined by a fearless willingness to experiment. She wrote a musical, The Light Princess, which premiered in London in 2013. She delved into classical music, re-recording some of her most famous songs with an orchestra. She released albums that were deeply personal and political, tackling everything from the Iraq War to the complexities of the Me Too movement. She never shied away from controversy, never backed down from a challenge. She was an artist who believed that music could be a force for change, a tool for healing, a way to speak truth to power. Tori Amos's legacy is not just in the millions of records she sold or the awards she won. Her legacy is in the lives she touched, the people who felt seen and heard for the first time when they listened to her music. She was a voice for the voiceless, a beacon for the lost. She took the trauma of her life and transformed it into a powerful, universal language. She showed the world that it was possible to be both a survivor and an artist, to be both broken and beautiful. She proved that the most powerful instrument is not a guitar or a drum kit, but the human voice, when it is used to speak the truth. In the end, the woman at the piano, the one who spoke to a generation, is still there. She is still playing, still writing, still finding new ways to make sense of a world that is often chaotic and cruel. Her music is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is still the possibility of light. It is the sound of a survivor, a poet, and a truth-teller. It is the sound of Tori Amos, and it is the sound of a voice that will never be silenced. Her story is not a tragedy, but a triumph. It is a story of a woman who was told what she couldn't be, and who, in the end, became everything she was meant to be. The music continues, a powerful, unwavering melody echoing through the ages, a conversation between a woman and her piano, and a world that is still listening.